There's a moment in every City Watch book when the joke stops being funny, and you suddenly realize Terry Pratchett isn't just making you laugh. He's revealing something about us we didn't want to know. The fifth elephant doesn't wait. It begins already shifting beneath your feet, unsettling your trust in order, in history, in the very myths that keep people obedient and nations intact. And at the center of that unease stands Sam Vimes, older now, wearier, and dangerously close to being everything he once hated. The story opens not with Vimes, but with blood. A diplomat is murdered in Ankh-Morpork, and something ancient is stolen. The replica of the Scone of Stone, not just a sacred relic to dwarfs, but the cornerstone, literally, of their monarchy. A scone baked with fat in history and myth. It sounds ridiculous. It is ridiculous, but it's also the glue holding together a people who live underground and barely look up. Dwarfs don't believe in daylight. They believe in tradition. They believe in solemn oaths, beards as identity, and baking rocks into legitimacy. The theft of the scone isn't just a crime. It's heresy. And worse, it's political. Which is why Vimes, now Duke of Ankh, commander of the Watch, and deeply uncomfortable aristocrat, is forced to travel to Überwald as an ambassador. It's supposed to be a ceremonial visit to attend the crowning of the new Low King, but diplomacy, in Pratchett's world, is just war with better clothes. And Vimes, no matter how well tailored, still carries a badge under the silk. That's what makes him dangerous. He still believes in justice, but he's starting to forget why. Überwald is a land caught in a chokehold between past and future. It's where old powers still walk the snow-covered forests, vampires, werewolves, trolls, and dwarfs who haven't learned how to live without a cave ceiling over their heads. This is where Pratchett makes you feel history, not as a story, but as a weight. Every step Vimes takes in Überwald is through centuries of blood and bone and quiet oppression. He's not just stepping into a foreign land, he's stepping into a dream that refuses to end. And the worst part is that dream has its own kind of logic. Corporal Cheery Littlebottom, female dwarf alchemist, follows him, and Cheery is the future. She's putting on lipstick, she's shaping her beard, she's saying, I don't have to be what my people say I must be. It seems small, comic even, but in Pratchett's hands, it's revolution. Because in a world built on roles carved into stone, identity is rebellion. Gender is not fluid in dwarf society, it's invisible. And that invisibility is survival. Cheery choosing visibility is not safe. But that's what the fifth elephant keeps asking. Who are you when you step out of the mine, when the myth breaks and the sky doesn't fall? Meanwhile, back in Ankh-Morpork, Carrot and Angua hold the line. Sort of. Angua is a werewolf, and her past is about to eat her future. Her brother Wolfgang is the nightmare version of what she might have become. Feral, supremacist, consumed by blood and certainty. If Überwald is old Europe, with its Gothic legacies and ancestral feuds, then Wolfgang is its most monstrous child, proud of the purity of his bite. Pratchett makes no jokes here. Wolfgang isn't funny, he's terrifying. He believes in strength, in domination, in the righteous return of predator over prey, and Angua is terrified not of him, but of how easy it might be to agree with him. That's the deeper horror. The seduction of certainty. Vimes isn't immune to that seduction either. In Überwald, he meets his match in the form of Lady Margolata, a vampire, urbane, dangerous, and sly. She represents the new Überwald. She drinks blood, yes, but consensually. She is the idea that you don't have to stop being a monster to live in a society. You just have to sign a social contract. Sound familiar? That's Pratchett's great trick here, making the undead more reasonable than the living, because it's never about species, it's about power and the rules we write to hold it accountable. But the true heart of this book is the Scone of Stone, not the real one, the myth of it, the idea that somewhere once upon a time, someone baked legitimacy into a thing and said, this will hold us together. Every society has its scone, its founding story, and every ruler lives in fear of someone looking too closely and realizing it's just stale bread. In The Fifth Elephant, we learn that the scone is fake, or at least the one used in the coronation is a replica. And the real one, hidden, broken, irrelevant, but the ritual still works. The king is still crowned because it was never about the dough. It was about belief. That's the bitter truth. Pratchett doesn't mock belief. He mourns what it gets used for. He shows how myths are tools, sometimes weapons, and how power clings to them because it's easier than changing. Vimes, for all his cynicism, is a believer too. He believes in justice so hard it breaks him. There's a moment in the snow when he's chasing Wolfgang through a frozen forest, miles from any help, bleeding and furious, and you see it, the man who won't stop, not because he's brave, but because something inside him won't let the world be unfair, even when it's safer to look away. That's Vimes. That's his curse and his grace. When the book ends, the new low king is crowned, the watch returns home, the scone is still a lie, but the people believe in it, so the lie holds. That's the compromise. That's society. And it leaves a taste in your mouth, not of triumph, but of something you can't quite swallow. Because what if we need the myth more than the truth? What if we'd rather kneel to a symbol than face the uncertainty of thinking for ourselves? That's the edge the fifth elephant walks. It's not just about dwarfs and wolves and diplomacy. It's about what keeps a people together when truth is too fragile to bear weight. It's about the quiet fear behind every ceremony, that if someone laughs, the whole thing might crumble. But also, maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Maybe it has to crumble so we can build something better. There's a moment where Vimes meets the low king-to-be in Überwald, and it doesn't feel like a political summit. It feels like two men looking into each other's cracked reflections. Rhys Reeson isn't a king yet, and maybe he never will be, not in the way tradition demands, because he's something different, something dangerous. He is a dwarf who dares to listen, not just to the elders in the deep caves, but to the dwarfs on the surface, to the ones like Cheery, the ones asking, why must we hide ourselves to be accepted by our own kind? This book isn't just about the monarchy of dwarfs, it's about the structure of identity, when it becomes too small for the people who live inside it. And Pratchett knows that when an identity is squeezed too tightly, people either suffocate or explode. Rhys Reeson represents a third path, the one that risks everything by choosing dialogue over dominance. He doesn't just represent change, he is change, which makes him more terrifying to the old guard than any troll or vampire. While Rhys prepares for coronation, Vimes is wading through politics that stink of rot. There are conspiracies layered like onion skins, each one reeking of something old pretending to be new. And it always comes down to this: someone wants to go back to when dwarfs had caves and kings and clean lines between friend and enemy, back to when werewolves ruled Überwald with tooth and claw and no need for treaties, back to before Angua chose mercy over instinct. But Pratchett doesn't romanticize the past. He exposes it. He shows you what that past looked like if you weren't born into power, if you were a dwarf without a beard, or a werewolf who didn't want to kill, or a man like Vimes who clawed his way up from the gutter and still hears it calling. And there's irony always, because Vimes himself is becoming what he used to hate: a noble, a duke, a man with property and staff. He spends a good chunk of this book trying to hold on to himself as the walls close in around his new title. But here's the twist. It's not the walls that threaten him. It's the temptation of ease, of letting someone else handle the hard decisions, of being the man who just signs the paper. The rot isn't just out there in Überwald. It's in him, and he knows it. That's why he walks into danger, not for diplomacy, not for the scone, but to remind himself who he is while he still can. Back in Ankh-Morpork, the watch has to carry on without him, and that means Carrot. But Carrot is off balance. Without Vimes, he's lost the gravity that keeps his certainty from becoming tyranny. That's the key to Carrot. He's so good. He's dangerous. He believes in the system with a terrifying purity, but systems don't deserve belief. They deserve scrutiny, and Vimes is the one who does the scrutinizing. Carrot enforces, Vimes doubts. They need each other. And Angua, she sees that. She sees the brittle edge in Carrot. And she also sees herself in Wolfgang, the werewolf who never questioned his right to dominate. There's a brutal scene where Angua is forced to fight her brother, not just for survival, but for her soul. Because Wolfgang isn't just a killer, he's an idea. The idea that strength means power, and power means correctness. That's what Angua must kill, not the wolf, the lie, and she nearly dies doing it. Vimes faces Wolfgang too, but not as a soldier, as a man, no tricks, no army, just Vimes with a torch and a frozen lake and a moral line drawn in the snow. It's not a noble duel, it's ugly and painful, and it hurts to watch. But it's also the moment when the book stops being clever and becomes something else entirely. Vimes doesn't win because he's stronger. He wins because he endures, because he refuses to break, because somewhere inside him, the watchman still walks the beat and won't let a monster pass, even if no one else is watching. Especially then. That's the raw heart of the fifth elephant. The things we do when no one's watching, the lies we hold in public, and the truths we carry in private, and the small flickering hope that justice can be real, even if the crown is fake. But the most haunting part, Pratchett doesn't give you closure. The scone is still a replica. The truth stays buried. Rhys Reeson is crowned, but the schism inside dwarf culture deepens. And Vimes returns home to a city that is starting to forget what he's fighting for. Nothing ends, nothing is fixed. And that's the point, because in the end, the fifth elephant is about the cost of believing in better. It's about the wounds you take for daring to change. It's about the quiet bravery of people like Cheery, who put on lipstick and say, "This is who I am," in a world that tells them to shut up and hide. It's about the choices Vimes makes in the dark, cold forest, knowing they'll never make the front page. And it's about the terrifying, liberating realization that justice doesn't come from a crown or a scone or even a badge. It comes from what we do when we're alone. And maybe that's what the fifth elephant is, not the missing piece of Discworld's mythic cosmology, but the truth we bury because it's too inconvenient, too heavy, the thing we pretend isn't there because admitting it would force us to change, but it's there, crashed into the ground, buried beneath politics and tradition and legacy, waiting for someone like Vimes to dig it up and say, "Look, this is real, deal with it." The moment you understand the title, The Fifth Elephant, is the moment you realize Pratchett was never just telling a story. He was digging up buried bones. The Discworld rides on the backs of four giant elephants, themselves standing on the shell of Great Atuin, the cosmic turtle swimming through space. It's mythology as metaphor, world building as joke. But the fifth elephant, it was the one that fell, the outlier, the one that crashed into the disc, reshaping continents, leaving behind the fat deposits that birthed the fortunes of Überwald. It doesn't fit the story, so the story pretends it's not there. That's what this book is really about, the things we leave out of history because they make the rest harder to tell. The cracks in the myth, the broken elephant that explains everything, but is too inconvenient to remember. Pratchett wasn't just poking fun at politics. He was whispering something deeper, that every civilization is built on something we've chosen not to talk about, and eventually it leaks. In Überwald, that leak becomes literal. Fat seeps out of the land, rivers of yellow wealth that fuel the economies of dwarf mines and feed vampire estates. It's wealth born from the impact of something forgotten. But wealth, like power, carries memory, and that memory haunts everything. Dwarf society built their rituals and monarchies on it, but it's a foundation soaked in silence. And silence, in Pratchett's world, is where lies take root. What's staggering is how calmly this book holds contradiction. Rhys Reeson, the new Low King, is not a man, not a woman either. Rhys is a dwarf and also a shift. A moment in time when the story starts to bend toward a future that hasn't been invented yet. Rhys doesn't look like change. Reese is change, the crowning of a monarch who can't be read by old eyes, who won't confirm whether they're male or female, because the crown should rest on wisdom, not beard length. And yet that question burns through the dwarf community, and they don't know how to place Reese, which means they don't know how to obey. Pratchett saw this long before it was safe to say it. The people most feared are not those who wield power, but those who make us question what power is supposed to look like. The Watch, meanwhile, is evolving. Slowly, reluctantly. Vetinari, the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, doesn't send Vimes to Überwald just for ceremony. He sends him because he knows something Vimes doesn't, that politics is theater, and theater needs the right actor. Vimes doesn't see himself as an actor, but that's why he's perfect. Because in a world full of people pretending, someone who refuses to lie becomes the most dangerous figure on stage. Then there's detritus, a troll, a sergeant, often the comic relief. But here, like in every Discworld novel worth remembering, the joke wears off and you're left with someone who bleeds. Detritus in Überwald is more than muscle. He's a reminder that even the lowest ranks of society, creatures built of stone, considered slow, expendable, can carry wisdom and loyalty that puts their supposed betters to shame. Detritus watches. He listens. He doesn't flinch, and in a world that still sorts people by species and ancestry, that makes him revolutionary. There's a scene, quiet, almost missable, where Cheery steps forward in full makeup and feminine clothing in front of a room full of dwarfs. She's shaking, she's terrified, but she does it anyway. And in that moment, it's not about gender. It's not even about courage. It's about refusing to vanish, refusing to be edited out of history. That's the book's emotional anchor. Not the fake scone, not the political games, but the raw, trembling assertion of identity in the face of tradition that says no. Vimes doesn't know how to deal with this. Not really. He supports Cheery, yes. He respects her, but he doesn't understand because part of him still wants the world to make sense in the old way. Criminals, victims, justice. But Cheery's truth doesn't fit on a form. It doesn't break the law. It just refuses to sit quietly. And that makes Vimes uncomfortable. That's what makes this book so brave. It allows its hero to be wrong. And it doesn't punish him for it, it just lets him learn, and learn he does, because the closer he gets to the crown, the more he realizes what it means to carry power. Not to wield it, to carry it like a weight, like something you never wanted but must hold anyway, because the alternative is letting someone worse pick it up. That's Vimes in a sentence, a man who never asked to matter, but keeps showing up because he knows if he doesn't, the wolves win. Wolfgang is the ghost of what Überwald could be. Pure blood, no compromise, claws out, teeth first. He doesn't just kill, he converts. He wants the world to be like him or gone. When he and Vimes face each other, it is not a duel, it's philosophy with teeth. And Vimes doesn't win because of clever tricks or luck. He wins because he's a man who walks the line, literally. He carries a chalk line in his pocket and draws it on the ground when he needs to remember what's right. Who does that? Who draws their own boundary and dares the world to step over it? Only someone who knows what it's like to cross it himself. Pratchett doesn't give us clean endings. Cheery's future is uncertain. Reese's reign is already under siege by whispers and suspicion. The scone of stone remains a lie everyone agrees to believe. And yet we feel hope, not because the world is fixed, but because someone is still trying. That's all we get. That's all we need. Someone trying. And maybe that's what the fifth elephant really represents. Not the literal chunk of fat, rich rock that fell from space, but the forgotten truth that still shapes the world, whether we acknowledge it or not. The thing we don't talk about, the weight we carry but can't name. Pratchett dares us to dig it up, to name it, to sit with its discomfort and say, yes, this happened. Yes, it matters. There is no moral at the end, no neat bow, just the city of Ankh-Morpork waiting for the next crime, the next lie, the next hero who doesn't want to be one. It's always been easy to underestimate the fifth elephant. It doesn't have the manic energy of guards, or the emotional crescendo of Night Watch. It doesn't dazzle with fantasy tropes, but what it does, quietly, insistently, is unearth the machinery of power and ask what happens when good people start becoming part of that machine. What it lacks in flash, it delivers in weight, and Vimes is carrying more weight than ever. When he returns to Ankh-Morpork at the end, he's not returning as the same man who left, He's the man who was used as a diplomatic chess piece, who stared into the frozen face of ideological violence, who saw how easy it is to let civilization slip backward while pretending you're holding the line. Vimes went to Überwald thinking he was being sent to play ambassador, but the truth is, Vetinari sent him to remind himself what he still believes in. Because the patrician knows you can't govern a city like Ankh-Morpork without believing in something, even if that something is just a man who carries chalk in his pocket and still believes in drawing lines in the dirt. But here's the twist. Vimes isn't just drawing lines for the world, he's drawing them for himself, because the darkness inside him, the beast that smells blood and likes it, is always there. It's the same beast Wolfgang gave into, the same beast Angua fights every day. And Vimes, he doesn't kill it, he doesn't purify it, he just chains it to a desk and makes it file reports. That's what real justice is in this book. Not nobility, not purity, discipline. The day in, day out refusal to give in to what would be easier. That's where Pratchett's genius lies. Not in fantasy, but in refusal. He refuses to let his characters be symbols. They're not mouthpieces or saints. They're messy, contradictory, flawed people who want to do right and often don't know what that means. And so Vimes walks back into his city, into the noise and the stink and the bureaucracy, carrying the ghost of the fifth elephant with him. Let's talk about that ghost. The fifth elephant is the metaphor that haunts this entire book. It crashed into the disc and left something behind. Fat, yes, but more than that. A distortion, a scar, a reminder that the world is not as orderly as we pretend it is. Every tradition, every crown, every piece of baked mythology that holds a society together, it all sits on top of something chaotic and forgotten. The elephant fell and the world moved on. But the damage remained. That's the elephant. It's history. The kind that isn't in books, the kind we mine for wealth, but never want to talk about. What Pratchett is whispering, between the jokes, behind the Bourdain, the snowdrifts, under the coronation speeches, is that all of us are walking on the remnants of fallen elephants. Every country, every law, every city built on a lie someone decided was easier than the truth, and sometimes those lies take the shape of scones and kings and ancient traditions. Sometimes they look like history books that start just a few pages too late. Sometimes they look like stories about dwarfs and werewolves and a policeman who doesn't know when to quit. But they're all the same thing, the story we choose to tell, when the truth is too raw. And yet in the middle of all that, there's still something defiant, something hopeful. Because despite everything, the corruption, the lies, the fake scone, the unspoken wars, Vimes still believes, not in the system, but in the idea that the system could be just. If someone's watching, if someone cares enough to not look away, that's what he teaches us. Not that the world is fair, but that it might be if we keep drawing those lines. Cheery keeps wearing her lipstick. Angua returns to the watch, knowing the battle inside her never really ends. Carrot, still impossibly decent, goes back to enforcing rules written in ink while Vimes writes new ones in his head. Detritus goes back to being the rock that no one notices is carrying half the building. And the fake scone of stone stays where it is, carrying the weight of a nation that can't bear to know the real one was lost. Nothing changes, and everything does, because that's how change works in Discworld. Quietly, slowly, through one person saying no when everyone else is tired, through one dwarf stepping into the light, through one cop refusing to stop walking the beat, through one lie being exposed and another being told, but with slightly better intentions. It's not perfect, but it's better. And maybe in a world full of fifth elephants, better is enough. In the final pages, Pratchett doesn't give us fireworks. He gives us the city breathing again, the Watched returning to normal. But underneath that normal, something is shifting, something unspoken, something alive. That's how revolutions happen. Not with drums, but with footsteps, with someone showing up to work every day, even when they're tired, even when they know the world hasn't changed enough, especially then. And that's what the fifth elephant leaves us with. Not answers, not clarity, but a wait, a question, a decision. Will you keep walking